Welcome to part 3 in our journey to visit the Civil War battlefields that my great-great-grandfather Fred Block fought in with the Wisconsin 5th Independent Light Artillery. In part 1, we visited New Madrid, Missouri, where they fought there for the Battle of Island Number 10, a gateway to open up the southern Mississippi River to retake control for the Union Army. In part 2, we followed their journey up the Tennessee River and to the battlefield of Shiloh, where so many lost their lives there. And then they joined with them to fight in the Battle of Farmington, Mississippi, and also in the First Battle of Corinth, Mississippi, to gain control of the great railroad crossroads there. Now in part 3, we follow them as they journey up the Natchez Trace as they've been transferred to the Army of Tennessee under General Buell, and they are heading up to Tennessee to Nashville, and then from Nashville they get orders to march up for a total of 350 miles or so to Louisville, Kentucky, to stave off a Confederate invasion. It was a race against time, which one would get there first. And then we will look at the battle that they face off against them in the Battle of Chaplain Hills in Perryville, Kentucky.
We start this leg of the journey driving up the beautiful Natchez Trace Parkway, a road that is now part of the National Park System. Since we entered the parkway in northeast Mississippi following the 5th Battery's route to Nashville, we traveled a little less than half of the 440-mile route, but we still had the opportunity to savor the beauty of the surrounding land and relish in its rich history. Several stops along the way gave us opportunity to walk the original paths, including the sunken trace where footsteps of innumerable travelers before us had eroded the road far below the surrounding ground. At the Tennessee River, we viewed the site where Chickasaw Chief George Colbert operated a river ferry across the Tennessee River from 1800 to 1819. A shrewd businessman, Colbert charged Andrew Jackson $75,000 to ferry his army across the river during the War of 1812. Today, that section of the river is part of Pickwick Lake and is crossed by a modern bridge. Further up the trace, we stopped to see the cabin at Grinder's Stand, where Meriwether Lewis mysteriously died of gunshot wounds on his way to Washington in 1809, 3 years after his famous voyage with William Clark. There is disagreement whether it was a case of suicide or murder. The Natchez Trace Parkway terminates in Nashville without any sign marking the end. When the 5th Battery and accompanying regiments finished their 200-mile march at Murfreesboro, south of Nashville, they soon learned their marching was not over. One soldier commented that they had barely had time for their clothes to dry before General Buell ordered his Army of the Ohio to march into Kentucky. They were rushing to defend Louisville from a planned attack by Confederates. Confederate General Braxton Bragg was marching his army from east of Nashville to join General Kirby Smith, who had recently defeated a Union army at Richmond, Kentucky, and taken possession of Lexington. The two rebel armies planned to meet near Bardstown to make a combined assault on Louisville. Kenneth Noe, in his book Perryville, The Grand Havoc of Battle, wrote, Don Carlos Buell's veteran Federals pursued the Confederates in exhausted agony, occasionally marching over 30 miles a day, sometimes until midnight, only to rise again at 2 or 3. The ragged, footsore, and often barefoot Army of the Ohio stumbled insensibly northward, like drunken men along the path of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad toward Bowling Green. Short on supplies, the men were put on half rations and then quarter rations while pressing north to Louisville. With Buell and Bragg taking parallel routes, Union soldiers referred to their march as the Great Foot Race against the rebels. Meanwhile, in Louisville, the city was in a panic. Union General Bull Nelson was in charge of defending the city with a smaller army of mostly new recruits, not knowing if Buell's troops would reach them before Braxton and Smith's Confederate armies. On September the 22nd, he ordered all women and children to evacuate the city. All businesses were closed, and able-bodied men worked to build fortifications and dig earthworks for defense. Kenneth Noe reports that 16 ferries operated around the clock, along with 3 pontoon bridges providing transportation for those fleeing across the Ohio River to safety in Indiana. When General Bragg saw that he could not beat the Federal troops to Louisville, he proceeded to Bardstown. Buell's Army of the Ohio entered West Point, Kentucky, just south of Louisville, exhausted, hungry, thirsty, and covered with the dirt from their long march. A colonel commented, "It was a rare and touching sight to see these poor fellows so covered with limestone dust that their garments, beards, hair, and visages were all of the same color, all seeming old and gray with the dust, and bending under the burden of their guns and knapsacks, limping along on blistered feet. They appeared more like grim specters than young and sturdy men." Despite their appearance, the soldiers were welcomed by the citizens with cheers, flag waving, and most importantly, food and water. Debbie and I drove into West Point, south of Louisville, looking for the remains of Fort Duffield that sat high on a hill overlooking the Ohio River. Going down a narrow one-lane road, we came to a dead end. There we parked and began the hike up the steep hill leading to the ruins of the fort. None of the original buildings remain, but the earthen walls designed to stop cannonballs are very visible and in good condition after 160 years. While the Union Army was in Louisville, the mental strain and tension of war began to manifest, not only in the rank and file but also in leadership. Two Union generals who both had a reputation for being hot-headed, Jefferson C. Davis and Bull Nelson, had an ongoing dispute that came to a head at the Galt House Hotel. While in a heated argument, General Davis borrowed a gun from a friend and fatally shot General Nelson, who was unarmed. Nelson, who had been a notoriously hard man, knowing he was dying, requested a clergyman. He wished to convert and be baptized. An army chaplain that was having breakfast in the hotel rushed to him shortly before he died. General Davis was arrested but never tried, and eventually regained his command as a brigadier general. The 5th Wisconsin Battery would later serve under his command during the latter part of the war. 2 days after the shooting, the Union armies, under commanding General Don Carlos Buell, began advancing towards Bardstown. Bragg's army began retreating to Perryville. General Buell organized his army into 3 corps, taking separate roads toward Perryville. The Wisconsin 5th Battery was assigned to the 3rd Corps, commanded by General Charles Gilbert, which took the most direct route toward Perryville on the Springfield Pike. They arrived just outside of the town on October the 7th and encountered a skirmish with the Confederate cavalry. An artillery duel commenced between the Wisconsin 5th Battery and the rebel artillery, after which the enemy's guns were silenced. At the time, Kentucky was experiencing a severe drought, with most creeks and rivers being dried up. With men and horses desperately needing water, a small battle ensued in the early morning hours of the 8th for access to Doctor's Creek, which still had a little water in it. After a few hours of battle, the smaller force of rebels opposing them retreated back toward the Chaplin River, where the bulk of Confederate army remained. Later in the morning, the 1st Corps, commanded by General Alexander McCook, arrived on their left via the Mackville Road, and the 2nd Corps, commanded by General Thomas Crittenden, came up on the right on the Lebanon Pike. Because the 1st and the 2nd Corps were late in arriving, commanding General Buell decided to postpone the attack on the rebels until the next day. Because of a fall involving his horse, Buell was unable to sit or ride and remained at his camp 1 mile to the west of his troops. However, Confederate General Bragg had no intentions of waiting for Buell. Under the false impression that most of the Federal Army was marching towards Kirby Smith's forces near Frankfort and Lexington, Bragg ordered an attack on General McCook's 1st Corps, totally unaware that all of Buell's army was nearby. Many of McCook's troops were fresh recruits with little to no training. Rebel forces, shown on the map in red, began pushing back Federal troops, shown in blue, with a great slaughter of men on both sides. General Buell, back at Union headquarters a mile or so west of the action, was unaware of the battle. The rolling Chaplin Hills, accompanied by a west wind, created an acoustic shadow preventing the generals from hearing the rifle fire. Hearing the cannons only occasionally, Buell assumed they were just practicing or firing into the woods, and sent an order that they stop wasting ammunition. Union soldiers in the 3rd Corps, where the 5th Wisconsin Battery was, watched in horror from across Doctors Creek as they saw the 1st Corps being pushed back, but could not get the orders to join in the fight. When Buell did get word that McCook's 1st Corps was about to get overrun, he refused to believe it since he could not hear the sounds of battle. Eventually, in the late afternoon, orders were given for Gooding's brigade from the 3rd Corps to march to the assistance of the 1st Corps. The battery assigned to them was the 5th Wisconsin Battery. Gooding marched his men on the Double Quick over a mile through the woods to reach the Benton Road and turned right, passing wounded and retreating men. If this intersection was lost, the 1st Corps would be cut in two, which would result in defeat. Debbie and I arrived at the Perryville battlefield on October 8th, the 159th anniversary of the battle. My goal was to find the exact location where the Wisconsin 5th Battery unlimbered their cannons to stop the oncoming attack and save the retreating Union troops from being divided and destroyed. After getting some helpful advice from the park manager at the museum, we began the driving tour of the battlefield.
This area on the east side of the battlefield park is where the Confederates pretty much started there and back into Perryville and camped around about. They would soon be marching west towards the Union Army, confronting them. What started off as just a very small battle over a water hole on the creek kept escalating and escalating.
We continued to explore the battlefield and found Doctors Creek, which was the source of water and contention where the early skirmishing began. After crossing the creek, we made our way up the hill to Dixville Crossroads, where the now full-blown battle came to a climax.
Here's a sign at the Dixville Crossroads where the people at the park office said the 5th Wisconsin Battery was located.
Not finding the battery's location at the crossroads, we turned and then found what we were searching for just a little further up the hill.
I finally found it. This is the point where my great-great-grandfather, Fred Block, along with the rest of the 5th Wisconsin Light Battery Artillery, set up here at the battle. They had not been called in till later in the afternoon because they were in the divisions that weren't even fighting because Buell would not allow them to fight, not knowing how intense the battle was. And McCook's division was almost at the point of being overrun. They were brought in, they set up here on this hill. They were only able to set up 5 of their guns instead of all 6 of them. As the Confederates were coming up against them, the infantry retreated and left them here to defend this by themselves. They stood there and held their ground and fired away. From different reports I've read, I think McCook said that they had fired into the very faces of the enemy that was approaching them. But they held their ground and kept them from coming further and overrunning all of McCook's division and routing them. And later General McCook credited them with saving his whole division. So thankful to know that my great-great-grandfather, Fred Block, stood and helped protect this ground. It's said that President Lincoln had prepared his Emancipation Proclamation, but was waiting for a great Union victory to announce that Emancipation Proclamation. And this battle at Perryville, Chaplain Hills, provided that opportunity. And it was immediately right after this that he announced the Emancipation Proclamation.
That night, Braxton Bragg ordered his Confederate army to leave their wounded and dead on the battlefield and secretly began their retreat back to Tennessee. Never again would the Confederate army invade Kentucky. The Wisconsin 5th Battery would again face off against Bragg's troops at the Battle of Stones River in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where they would suffer great loss, including the death of their beloved captain, Oscar Penny. That will be included in our next video, Civil War Journey Part 4. We deeply appreciate you watching and hope you will subscribe to our channel so as not to miss upcoming episodes.